There's a dangerous lie that's been implanted in almost everyone's mind from a young age. The idea that you need to suffer now, to live later, work non-stop now, sacrifice your health now, swallow your frustrations now, accept an empty life now, all in exchange for the promise that one day maybe you'll finally feel freedom. But what if I told you that most people who chase money never learn to truly live? And worse, many only realize this when they've already lost the best years of their lives. Machiavelli understood something that remains frighteningly relevant today. Those who don't learn to see reality as it is end up being controlled by it. Politics guided by reality, not by ideals. While the world distracts you with pretty phrases like work hard and everything will be all right, there's a small minority building something completely different. They don't wait to become millionaires to live freely. They begin to structure a free life even before their fortune arrives. And that's exactly what almost no one teaches. Because true wealth isn't about showing off an expensive car online. It's not about appearing powerful. It's not about faking success while living with inner anxiety. True wealth is being able to breathe without constant fear. It's waking up without feeling like your life belongs to the clock. It's having the freedom to say no. Better to be feared than loved also means not depending emotionally or financially on anyone's approval. And the most curious thing is that many apparent millionaires remain trapped, while ordinary people silently begin to build true freedom. In this video, you'll understand why money matters much more than you've been taught. You'll discover the invisible trap of the phrase, "time is money." You'll see why saving money alone will hardly create real freedom. And most importantly, you'll understand the concept of the virtual millionaire, people who have learned to live autonomously even before reaching millions. What you're about to hear may completely change the way you see work, money, time, and life itself. Because once someone understands this game, it becomes impossible to go back to thinking the way they did before. If something inside you awakened while listening, don't ignore that feeling. This channel isn't about videos, it's about memories. Remember who you were before the fear, before the exhaustion, before the silence. Each new video here is a different reflection of your own soul, an invitation to understand what the world never taught you. The power you seek outside has always been within you. If you feel that this journey speaks to what lives silently within you, sign up now. Not to follow yet another creator, but to reconnect with something the world tried to make you forget. Because here, every word was made to heal, each reflection to awaken, and each video serves as a reminder. You are not alone on the path back to yourself. Click on subscribe and turn the algorithm into a daily reminder of who you really are. Some people spend their entire lives repeating that money doesn't buy happiness, but curiously, that same person loses sleep when a bill is due, when their car breaks down, or when they have to say, "I can't," to their own family. And that's where the first dangerous illusion begins. Money may not buy absolute peace, but it buys mental silence in moments when most people despair. Machiavelli understood something that many people still avoid seeing. Reality doesn't bend to beautiful ideals. Politics guided by reality, not by ideals, also applies to financial life. Because when money is lacking, even love suffers pressure. Freedom diminishes, time disappears. Dignity begins to silently negotiate with itself. And the problem is that many people have been taught to treat money as something dirty, almost a modern sin. They grew up hearing that wanting to prosper is greed. But nobody talks about what happens when you are financially dependent on someone who controls your life. Nobody talks about the invisible weight of waking up on Monday, already tired of the following Friday. Money, when understood correctly, is not about luxury. It's about autonomy. It's about being able to choose. And there is a stark difference between living and merely surviving. while the clock keeps ticking. The curious thing is that most people work exactly as they were trained. They trade time for survival and call it stability. But stability without freedom is just a comfortable prison. It's better to be feared than loved, said Machiavelli, because depending on the world's approval leaves any man vulnerable. And financially, this happens all the time. People accept jobs they hate because they're afraid of disappointing others. They stay in routines that slowly kill their dreams because they've been convinced that security is worth more than life. But observe someone who is financially free for a few minutes. They walk differently. They breathe differently. They decide differently. Not because they have millions in the bank, but because money has removed invisible chains. A man who can say no without fear begins to recover his own identity. And that changes everything. Imagine two people with the same salary. One lives in debt trying to maintain an appearance of virtue to impress others. The other invests in assets, reduces dependencies, and builds recurring income. In 5 years, they will be in completely different worlds, and almost no one notices this because the system rewards those who appear rich, not those who are quietly building freedom. There's also a detail that few people mention. Money buys quality time. It buys better health. It buys access. It buys mobility. It buys distance from toxic environments. A financially organized person can solve problems in hours that would destroy months of another's life. This isn't arrogance, it's strategy. Virtù and fortuna have always gone hand in hand. Luck favors those who create structure before the storm arrives. And while many romanticize hardship, the truly intelligent understand the calculated use of force. They use money as a tool, not as an emotional trophy. They buy freedom before buying status. They invest before showing off. They learn before appearing. A simple example of this is someone who learns a digital skill today, video editing, copywriting, paid traffic, programming, and transforms it into scalable income while others remain stuck with just a fixed salary. The game changes when money ceases to be an emotion and becomes a strategy. Because ultimately, almost all financial suffering stems from the same root. People who were never taught to think about money in the right way. And the most dangerous thing is that there's a seemingly intelligent phrase that continues to sabotage millions every day without them even realizing it. There's a phrase that's been repeated so many times, it's become automatic truth in people's minds. Time is money. It sounds intelligent. It sounds profound. It even sounds like advice from a billionaire mentor. But when you look closely, you realize that this idea has silently destroyed the lives of many competent people because it teaches human beings to transform every minute of their existence into a bargaining chip. And when that happens, the person stops living and starts only producing. Machiavelli understood that decisions based on real human nature always reveal hidden intentions. And this phrase carries exactly that. A system where people believe they need to work more hours to earn more money. But there's a brutal limit to that. The day still has 24 hours. The body still gets tired. The mind still wears down. And sooner or later, the person realizes they are selling their own life in invisible installments. The most ironic thing is that many believe they are evolving while only increasing the speed of their own imprisonment. They work more, they sleep less. They earn a little more, and yet they remain without freedom because exchanging time directly for money is a game where the clock almost always wins. A man can earn 100 reais an hour and still be poor in freedom because if he stops working tomorrow, the money stops coming in immediately. This means he hasn't built a system. He's just created a more expensive job for himself. And here comes an uncomfortable question that almost no one asks. How much is an hour of your life really worth? Not what the market pays, how much it's worth to you. Because there is a difference. Imagine someone earning 8,000 rays a month, working 220 hours a month. It seems reasonable until he discovers that, discounting commuting, stress, eating out, emotional strain and lost time, he might be selling his most precious hours for less than he imagined. Politics guided by reality, not ideals. Emotional mathematics also needs to be factored in. How many memories were sacrificed? How many weekends disappeared? How many times did he say, "I'll deal with that later," about something important? The problem is that people calculate salary, but rarely calculate existential cost. And when they do so too late, they realize they spent their best years just surviving with the appearance of stability. The truly intelligent begin to see time differently. They understand that money can be multiplied, but time can never be recovered. That's why strategically dangerous people focus first on leverage. A video editor who creates an agency instead of just editing alone. A doctor who builds a structure beyond the traditional office. A content creator who builds an audience while sleeping. Your own loyal armies weren't just for ancient wars. Today, systems, assets, and audiences fulfill that role. They work even when you rest. And that's exactly where the game starts to change. While most still measure wealth by the number of hours worked, a small minority learns to measure wealth by the amount of free time preserved. Better to be feared than loved also means not depending entirely on the clock to survive. Because when someone depends solely on their physical presence to earn money, all it takes is an illness, a family problem, or an unexpected crisis for everything to crumble. And perhaps that's why so many people work so hard and remain so far from the freedom they imagined they were building. The scariest thing is that many of them still believe that saving every penny will solve this someday. There's a silent trap that ensnares almost everyone before they turn 40, the belief that one must suffer first in order to live. People wake up early, chase after money, swallow stress, sacrifice their health, ignore relationships, all believing that one day they can finally rest. The problem is that this one day rarely arrives as imagined. And when it does, often the body is already tired, the mind is already hardened, and life has lost some of its meaning. Machiavelli observed human reality without romanticism. Decisions based on real human nature show that most people trade the present for a future promise that may never exist. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Lost money can be recovered. Lost time never returns. Never. A man can rebuild his fortune after going bankrupt. He can recover assets. He can start new businesses. But no one can buy back the 20 years wasted living only on autopilot. And even knowing this, millions continue to sacrifice exactly what they have that is most precious. As if youth were infinite, as if emotional energy could be renewed eternally, as if living could be postponed without consequences. The most curious thing is that many people believe they are being responsible when in reality they are merely accepting a collective narrative. They work for 30 years waiting for retirement as if life were a dark corridor where happiness resides only at the exit. Politics guided by reality, not by ideals. Observe someone in their 60s saying, "I should have enjoyed life more." This phrase appears more often than people imagine, because there is a cruel detail that almost no one teaches. The value of time changes according to the stage of life. A trip at 20 doesn't have the same impact at 60. Physical disposition changes. Courage changes. Experiences change. And this also applies to family, friendships, and personal dreams. There are parents who completely sacrifice their presence in their children's childhood, believing they will compensate later with money. But emotional time has an expiration date. Certain moments cannot be replaced. That's why the world's most intelligent strategists don't build wealth just by accumulating assets. They try to buy freedom early. They try to preserve energy. They try to avoid being hated by life itself in the future. Because there is a brutal difference between getting rich and being able to live while getting rich. Those who are most financially vulnerable understand something that changes everything. The goal isn't to work until you die. The goal is to build a system where money continues to exist without completely consuming existence. Virtù and fortuna come back into play here. Luck without strategy disappears quickly, but strategy without awareness of time can also slowly destroy someone. Imagine two men. The first works 15 hours a day for 20 years, hoping to win at life. The second may earn less at the beginning, but uses calculated force. He learns sales, builds an audience, creates digital assets, invests in recurring income, and protects his time early on. 10 years later, one is financially trapped by his own effort. The other has begun to build real autonomy. And that's exactly what most people don't realize. People spend decades saving small amounts while ignoring the real problem. Their entire life model remains dependent on the direct exchange between time and survival. And when someone finally understands this, they begin to see why simply saving will hardly be enough to achieve true freedom. For a long time, they sold the idea that financial freedom only comes from extreme frugality. Stop eating coffee out. Cut out small luxuries. Save every penny. And while financial discipline is important, there's a mathematical detail that almost no one dares to mention. By simply saving, most people will never truly be free. Never. Because there's a natural limit to how much someone can cut expenses, but there's practically no limit to increasing income and building leverage. Machiavelli perfectly understood the calculated use of force. And in financial life, force doesn't mean working until you collapse. It means using strategy to multiply results. Imagine someone saving 500 reais a month for 10 years. It seems admirable. And in fact, it's better than drowning in debt. But now, do the cold math. How long would it take that person to build real freedom just by saving money? Decades, maybe a lifetime. Politics guided by reality, not ideals. Mathematics doesn't get emotional. While many try to save pennies, others are learning to create systems that generate thousands of reais in recurring income every month. The problem isn't saving. The problem is believing that saving alone will solve everything. This creates a false sense of progress. The person feels responsible, mature, organized, but remains trapped in the same financial model, dependent on their own daily effort. And here lies the silent trap. Because while they try to reduce small expenses, they ignore much more important questions. How to increase market value? How to develop scalable skills, how to build assets, how to transform knowledge into recurring income. Better to be feared than loved also applies financially. The market rewards those who create valuable solutions, not those who just cut costs. A simple example of this appears in two friends. The first spends 5 years trying to save an extra 200 reais per month. The second uses that same period to learn copywriting, video editing, or paid traffic, and starts providing online services. The first may end up with a small reserve. The second may have built an income-generating machine, his own loyal armies, systems that work alongside him. And the most interesting thing is that many people call this luck, when in reality, it was just a strategy applied consistently. There's also a dangerous psychological factor in the obsession with saving. It makes people think small without realizing it. The entire focus becomes avoiding minimal losses, while huge opportunities go unnoticed. A man spends hours looking for a 20 real discount, but doesn't dedicate 20 minutes to learning something that could increase his income forever. Virtù and fortuna go hand in hand. But fortune rarely appears for those who live only on the defensive. The smartest strategists understand that money needs to circulate intelligently. They invest in skills, contacts, businesses, audience, and assets. They buy time. They buy learning, they buy future opportunities, and this completely changes their life trajectory. Of course, controlling expenses remains important, but financial freedom doesn't arise from eternal scarcity. It arises from building cash flow, from creating mechanisms that continue to function even when you're not present. Because saving money is a defense, building recurring income is a strategic attack, and those who understand this difference begin to realize that there are two completely different paths in the financial game: accumulating money slowly or building systems that generate cash continuously. Most people have been taught to believe that getting rich means accumulating idle money, a full bank account, a slowly growing reserve. Maybe some traditional investments yielding returns in the background while the person continues working the same way every day. But there's a huge difference between possessing money and possessing cash flow. And almost no one realizes this early on. Machiavelli understood that real power wasn't just in possession, but in the continuous ability to sustain influence. One's own loyal armies weren't built solely on hoarded treasures, but on systems capable of keeping resources constantly circulating. The same is true today. A person can have 100,000 rays saved and still live in fear of losing everything. Another may have less accumulated wealth, but possess a structure that generates recurring income every month regardless of their presence. And guess who sleeps more soundly? The problem is that the modern world glorifies visible accumulation while ignoring invisible stability. People want to look rich quickly. They want to show off their achievements. They want the appearance of financial virtue. But few stop to build something that continues to function silently behind the scenes. Imagine two simple scenarios. The first man works for 15 years, saves aggressively, and accumulates 500,000 rays. It seems impressive, but he remains totally dependent on his own routine to keep that wealth alive. If he stops working, he slowly begins to consume the accumulated money. The second man may have accumulated less wealth in the same period, but he built a structure that generates 15,000 rays monthly recurring income through subscriptions, dividend investments, a digital operation, rental properties, or scalable services. A policy guided by reality, not ideals. Who is truly closer to freedom? The first has accumulation, the second has flow, and this completely changes the psychological game. Because flow reduces fear, reduces despair, reduces submission. A man with recurring income begins to negotiate differently with the world. He doesn't accept any toxic environment. He doesn't accept any abusive boss. He doesn't accept any emotional crumbs just for financial survival. Better to be feared than loved also means not being totally dependent on the economic approval of others. And when someone understands this deeply, they begin to see money in an almost strategic way, like an invisible chessboard where each move needs to generate future autonomy. Now consider something interesting. Many people believe that cash flow is a privilege reserved only for millionaire entrepreneurs, but that's not true. A student can start by creating content. A doctor can develop digital products. A publisher can set up a small agency. A freelancer can sell consulting services. An investor can gradually build passive income through REITs or dividend stocks like iTube 4, TAEE 11, or BBAS 3. The point isn't the initial format. The point is to create mechanisms that survive beyond constant physical presence. Virtu and Fortuna favor those who learn to transform effort into structure. Because pure effort wears you down. Structure multiplies. And sooner or later, every financially intelligent person realizes an uncomfortable truth. Freedom doesn't happen when you accumulate a lot of money. It begins when your life stops depending exclusively on your next workday. That's exactly where a concept that seems strange at first is born, but that completely changes how someone sees wealth. The virtual millionaire. When people hear the word millionaire, they almost always imagine giant mansions, exotic cars, absurdly expensive watches, and a cinematic life worthy of a movie. But there is a much quieter and perhaps much more intelligent form of wealth. The concept of the virtual millionaire is born precisely there. It's not someone who necessarily has millions accumulated in the bank. It's someone who has built enough income to cover their essential expenses without depending entirely on their own daily effort. And that changes everything. Machiavelli understood that true power is rarely noisy. Often, it is invisible. A truly free man doesn't need to prove anything to anyone. Politics guided by reality, not by ideals. The reality is that there are people earning 50,000 reais a month, completely enslaved by their own routine, while others living with 10 or 15,000 recurring incomes have much more peace, time, and autonomy. Because real wealth isn't just how much money comes in, it's how much of your life you control. And almost no one realizes this early on because the world has trained people to pursue appearances before pursuing freedom. The virtual millionaire understands a simple, seemingly counterintuitive logic. First, they reduce unnecessary dependencies. Then they build intelligent cash flow. While many try to immediately increase their standard of living by earning more, they strengthen their structure. They use money to buy time, not just status. Better to be feared than loved also means not being financially vulnerable to one's own ego, because many people earn more only to spend more. The car gets more expensive. The installments increase, the stress increases, and along with that grows the need to remain trapped in the same system to sustain a life that, deep down, didn't bring that much happiness. The virtual millionaire plays differently. Imagine someone whose actual monthly expenses are 7,000 reais. If this person builds assets or businesses that generate 10,000 recurring income without requiring constant presence, they have already begun to experience a form of freedom that many traditional millionaires have never felt. And the most curious thing is that, looking from the outside, perhaps no one thinks this person is rich, because silent wealth rarely impresses social media, but it deeply impresses real life. There's also an extremely powerful psychological aspect to all of this. When someone realizes their essential expenses are already protected by recurring income, fear begins to diminish. Decisions change. Courage increases, creativity reappears, virtù and fortuna come back into play. Because financially suffocated people rarely manage to think strategically. They live in survival mode. Someone who has achieved a minimum level of freedom begins to act with more emotional intelligence. They can choose better projects. They can study calmly. They can refuse toxic environments. They can build something bigger without immediate despair. And this creates an absurd advantage in the long term. A content creator who receives recurring monthly payments, a doctor with supplementary passive income, an editor with fixed monthly contracts, an investor receiving recurring dividends from HGLG11 or MXRF11. They are all building their own small, loyal armies that work while they live. And perhaps that's exactly why the smartest strategists don't focus first on appearing millionaires. They focus on living like free people even before reaching millions. The problem is that building this system requires adjustments, mistakes, and decisions that almost no one shows publicly. Almost everyone dreams of recurring income until they discover that building a real system requires much more than fleeting motivation. Because in the beginning, almost nothing seems to work. Most people imagine quick money, immediate growth, and instant freedom, but reality is usually quieter, slower, and more uncomfortable. Machiavelli understood something essential about any power building. Solid results rarely arise from impulsiveness. Virtù and fortuna go hand in hand, but fortuna usually appears after someone has endured phases where no one believed in the project. Imagine someone creating a digital subscription program. In the beginning, they might only have 5 clients. Then 10, then they lose half of them. They adjust the product, improve communication, learn marketing, redo everything again. And it is precisely here that most give up, because they were trained to seek quick rewards. But recurring systems require invisible consistency before producing visible freedom. Politics guided by reality, not by ideals. There is no romanticism in this. There is strategic repetition. There is constant adaptation. There is learning to build something that continues to generate value even when the initial enthusiasm disappears. The most common mistake people make is trying to monetize before learning how to solve real problems. They want to sell immediately without developing true utility for the market, and the market notices this quickly. Better to be feared than loved can also be understood as strategic respect. When someone delivers genuine results, they begin to build silent authority. A practical example of this appears in content creators who teach something specific. An editor teaches cinematic editing. A doctor simplifies complex topics. A copywriter shows how to structure ads. Gradually, the audience begins to trust, and then recurring products emerge. Closed communities, mentorships, premium newsletters, exclusive groups, or digital subscriptions. But almost no one shows the behind the scenes. The campaigns that failed. The months without return. The fear of looking ridiculous at the beginning. The calculated use of force here means testing small before expanding big. Many fail because they try to appear gigantic before validating something simple. The smartest strategists do the opposite. They start discreetly, adjust quickly, observe human behavior, and scale only when the system has already proven to work. There's also a stark difference between building recurring income on your own and building a machine that survives beyond your constant presence. Your own loyal armies come back into play. An intelligent system creates processes, automates parts, develops a team, organizes workflow. A content producer learns to delegate editing. A digital operation creates efficient support. A freelancer transforms knowledge into replicable products. And little by little, money stops depending exclusively on continuous physical effort. But this only happens when a person accepts an uncomfortable truth. Financial freedom rarely comes from perfection. It comes from continuous adjustments, from failing fast without abandoning the game, from understanding that building assets takes time, but remaining stuck in the same model takes a lifetime. And perhaps the most powerful thing about all this is realizing that almost anyone can start, even without millions, even without a perfect structure, because ultimately the first big change doesn't happen in the bank account. It happens when someone finally decides to calculate how much their own freedom costs and discovers the exact number they need to stop running away from in order to start building a different life. There comes a point when knowledge stops being entertainment and starts becoming a responsibility, because once someone understands how money really works, continuing to live on autopilot becomes deeply unsettling. And it's precisely here that almost everything changes. The first step isn't trying to become a millionaire overnight. It's not about opening 10 businesses at once. It's not about impulsively dropping everything. The smartest strategists begin by calculating something far more important: their own number of freedom. Politics guided by reality, not ideals. How much does this person's life really cost per month? Not the life based on appearances, not the life created to impress others. Real life: rent, food, healthcare, transportation, basic bills. And when someone honestly does this calculation for the first time, they usually discover something surprising. Perhaps they need far less than they imagined to begin building autonomy. The problem is that most people never sit down for 30 minutes to clearly see their own financial reality. They prefer to stay busy because facing numbers forces decisions, and decisions change destinies. After discovering this number, the next question becomes even more powerful. What income would continue to come in if this person stopped working today? This question separates survival from freedom. Imagine someone who earns 20,000 Rs a month working desperately, but would lose everything in 30 days without continuing to operate at the same pace. Now imagine another person who perhaps earns less, but has part of their income coming from assets, subscriptions, dividends, recurring contracts, or partially automated businesses. Who truly has more security? It's better to be feared than loved, because excessive dependence always creates vulnerability, and financially this is brutally true. A man completely dependent on his next paycheck can hardly make bold decisions. He negotiates out of fear. He accepts bad conditions. He tolerates toxic environments. Someone who has started building recurring income gains something far more valuable than money: a margin of choice. Virtù and fortuna favor those who create structure before necessity turns into desperation. And perhaps that's exactly why so many intelligent people remain financially trapped, because they never strategically organize the game of their own lives. Now, observe how this changes in practice. A student can start by building a digital skill that generates online income. A freelancer can set aside part of their income for cash-generating assets. A creator can transform audience into recurring revenue. A doctor can structure educational products beyond traditional clinical practice. A publisher can create fixed monthly packages instead of selling only individual projects. Constant adaptability. The financial game rewards those who learn to break free from linear dependence on their own time. And no, this doesn't mean abandoning responsibility or living in internet illusions. It means building financial intelligence with a long-term vision. Because ultimately, freedom isn't about stopping work. It's about stopping living trapped. The calculated use of financial power creates something extremely rare in the modern world: peace of mind. And perhaps that's exactly what so many people are seeking without realizing it. Not extravagant wealth, not empty status, just the silent feeling of waking up, knowing that their own life has finally begun to belong to them again. Ultimately, almost no one is truly tired of just working. People are tired of feeling like they live a long time and have little control over their own existence. Tired of trading precious time for survival. Tired of building a life that seems right on the outside, but empty on the inside. And perhaps the most important question isn't how much money do you want to earn. Perhaps it's how much of your life still belongs to you. Because now you've realized something that most will take decades to understand. Financial freedom doesn't begin when millions appear in your account. It begins the moment you decide to stop living on autopilot. When you start building assets, when you learn valuable skills, when you transform effort into a system, when you use money to buy time and not just appearances. Virtù and fortuna favor those who act before despair forces violent changes. So I want to leave you with an extremely honest challenge. If your income disappeared today, how long would your freedom last? What systems have you built? What assets continue to work for you? What skills could completely change your financial destiny in the coming years? Politics guided by reality, not ideals. Ignoring these questions might be comfortable now, but time silently takes its toll on everyone who postpones their own life. And perhaps the most dangerous thing is realizing that no one will come to save you financially. No government, no company, no boss. Better to be feared than loved also means developing enough autonomy not to depend entirely on the decisions of others. Because the moment you build minimal financial freedom, something changes inside you. Anxiety decreases, courage increases, life begins to feel like yours again. Now I want to know from you, What was the biggest truth that this video made you see? At what point did you realize that you might be trapped in an invisible cycle? Comment below. I really want to read your thoughts. And if you want to continue learning about money, strategy, freedom, and the invisible laws that control most people's lives without them realizing it, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Because the next videos will open up discussions that few people have the courage to have.